Now, the COVID information has just come through for both New South Wales and Victoria. And very sadly, we've come to a grim point in this outbreak in New South Wales. 4 more deaths, which means the death toll from this outbreak in New South Wales since it began back in June is now more than 500 people. There have been 294 new cases in New South Wales, so that's down from what it's been since restrictions were eased a couple of weeks ago now. And Victoria, the information has just come through as well. Very sadly, again, 7 more deaths in Victoria. But the number of cases in Victoria is down significantly on what it's been over the last 10 days or so. We had that peak in Victoria of around 2,300 cases 10 days ago, and today it's kind of bumped around that 2,000 mark since then. But today, the number of cases in Victoria, 1,461. Okay, let's go to New South Wales first, but just before we go to our reporter, a quick look at some graphs. So this doesn't include this latest information which has just come through today, which is that case numbers down in the 200s once again. But as I mentioned, restrictions were eased a couple of weeks back. The expectation was that cases were going to surge. That hasn't happened just yet, but people are still expecting that those case numbers will increase. Okay, let's take a look at the vaccination rates in New South Wales now. 93% of residents 16 and over have had 1 dose of a COVID vaccine. So the Chief Health Officer, Kerry Chand, would be very happy with that. A couple of weeks ago, she said her hope was that New South Wales will get to that point. It's achieved that. Now she hopes New South Wales will get to over 95, and close to 85% of the New South Wales population is now fully vaccinated. Reporter Mahnaz Angury joins us now from Sydney. Mahnaz, so yeah, just very sad to hear that 4 more deaths today, taking the death toll to more than 500. What other information have you got for us on New South Wales today?
Good morning, Joe. As you mentioned, we do have 294 new cases.
Mahnaz, I might just interrupt you there.
Our deaths have increased a lot as well. We have surpassed that 500 people. So 474 people are now in hospital and 116 people are in ICU. 93% of the eligible population have had their first dose and 85% are now fully vaccinated. So the vaccination rates are still going pretty well as more restrictions are eased here in New South Wales.
Now let's head into Victoria. 80% of eligible Victorians are expected to be vaccinated by this Friday, triggering a further easing of COVID restrictions. Now I'll go to our reporter Steph Ferrier in a moment, but first a quick look at some of the graphs today. So the information from yesterday was 11 deaths and 1935 new local cases. But today that information has just come through, and the bar hasn't been added to that graph just yet, but that just a number in the 1400s today. So at least one day doesn't make a trend, but at least that is significantly lower than those numbers we've seen over the last week or so. And taking a quick look at the vaccination rates in Victoria, so 74% of the state's eligible population is fully vaccinated and 90% have had at least 1 dose. Reporter Steph Ferrier joins us now from Melbourne. Steph, g'day. So take us through this latest information from Victoria.
Good morning, Joe. Yes, 1,461 new local coronavirus cases. So that is a reasonable drop from the 1,935 that we saw yesterday. That's down by 474. So quite significant, as you say there, but sadly another 7 deaths. So that raises our Delta toll to 230 now from this current outbreak. We've also seen, just in terms of the hospitalisation rates, they have actually ticked up a bit. They were 787 and they're now up to 802. So we do see more people going into hospital as a result. But our ICU numbers, or intensive care, is remaining relatively steady. They've gone from 146 yesterday up to 152 today. And also just one drop on the ventilator numbers, down from 93 to 92 of those people in ICU who are requiring a ventilator to breathe. But just in terms of the figures, this does mean that we're now at 24,831 active cases across the state, and this comes off the back of around 56,000 test results, or just under 57,000 test results that were processed. So that is, of course, quite a drop from the 70-odd thousand, but you've got to remember that that's also coming off a weekend, and the very first weekend that people were allowed out of lockdown. So we would have anticipated that those numbers would be lower. And also, importantly, the vaccination rates are still relatively strong for a Sunday as well, to have 27,859 vaccinations administered at state-run hubs. We're now up to, as you mentioned, the 74.1% mark for the double vaxxed and 90.4% for single doses here in Victoria. So that's really good news as we race towards that 80% mark.
And Steph, still pretty quiet there on the streets of Melbourne behind you, but there's optimism now with things planning to be opened up further this Friday.
Yes, good. Yes, that's right. It's a very cold morning and a very wet morning down here at Bourke Street Mall, and we don't see too many people out and about at the moment. But that's certainly expected to change as of 6 o'clock on Friday. So that is when all of these restrictions start to ease even further, and that is as a result of us being able to hit that 80% double vaccinated milestone. Now, importantly, it means that for many Melburnians, they can dust off their long delayed travel plans to get out of the city for this Melbourne Cup long weekend, and it's a real boon for those rural tourism operators who are also anticipating that they'll receive an uptick in business. After all, they really derive around 80% of their business from Melburnians as well. So this is as a result of Melbourne and regional Victoria finally being reunited, and that is meaning that we will be able to see unrestricted travel across Melbourne and across Victoria. In fact, we will also see these rules really being eased for hospitality and for other venues that are already opened up. So we're going to see the caps being replaced by density limits of 4 square metres per person indoors and 2 square metres per person outdoors, up to 500 people in some of those hospitality venues. We'll also see retail finally opening indoors, as well as gyms and entertainment venues like cinemas. We will also finally see that as of 6 o'clock on Friday, we will no longer have to wear our masks outdoors. That's been a very common feature here in Victoria through these long periods of lockdown as well. And so that is now only going to be required indoors. In terms of schooling, because it doesn't kick in until 6 o'clock on Friday, we won't see many schools going back and the students returning back full time until Monday. And unfortunately, many schools have also slapped on a student-free day for the quasi-long weekend, which means that those students won't return until Wednesday next week. But we'll also see major crowds coming back for events as well. They'll be able to have crowds of up to 5,000 without having to get the Chief Health Officer's approval for example, the 10,000 strong crowd that we're going to see for Melbourne Cup Day. But we heard just a little while ago on News Breakfast from Catherine Bennett, who is an epidemiologist at Deakin University, and she says that this is all thanks to those really fantastic vaccination levels that we're now seeing and the efforts of all Victorians, and she says that you can really see that there's now a lot of confidence behind these announcements on easing. Let's have a listen to what she had to say.
Even though our case numbers are high, we are seeing our levelling out of hospitalisations at much lower rates than predicted, and lower rates than Sydney experienced, at the same point as they were kind of at the peak of their wave. Even though we've got more case numbers, we've got far fewer hospitalisations. So that's showing how the vaccine works. That should give us all confidence.
And we're going to see even more restrictions disappear as of the 24th of November, when we're going to hit 90% 12 and over fully vaccinated. And that's when we'll be back to as close to normal as possible here, but only for the fully vaccinated in Victoria.
Okay, Stephanie Ferrier reporting there from Melbourne. Okay, let's head back to New South Wales now. We were talking to our reporter Mahnaz Angury before, but we lost the line, but we've got that back now. So Mahnaz, schools are back for all students today?
Good morning, Joe. That's right. So school is back for all grades across New South Wales. This comes after last week we welcomed kindergarten, Year 1 and Year 12 students as part of Stage 2 of New South Wales roadmap out of lockdown. Now, this was supposed to happen a little bit later down the track, but it was brought forward by the Premier, Dominic Perrottet, when he was elected. So joining me now is the Executive Director, Greg Whitby, of the Catholic Education Diocese of Parramatta. Greg, thank you so much for joining me. What's been the reaction like with the schools reopening today?
It's been fantastic. I was here this morning to welcome all these students back to school, and there's a real eagerness and excitement both on the student side and on the kids' side. And of course, these areas serve in those LGAs that were sort of most affected in the lockdown, and it's great to see the resilience and the work that our teachers and our kids did to get through that, and of course the excitement now of coming back. We hope they have no more interruption, but they have fun as they move towards the end of the year.
And as we mentioned, this did happen sooner than we anticipated. How do you feel about that?
I think it's a very good thing, as soon as we get things back to a bit of normalcy, whatever that is, but certainly it was trying on everyone. The work of teachers as they were sort of doing blends of remote and back face to face. And giving that certainty's allowed them to plan ahead, and it's allowed the kids to get organised and bring to the end a very traumatic school year for them.
And, you know, there is still COVID around, so what COVID measures can we expect at the schools?
We have very strict COVID restrictions and processes in place. All our teachers are double vaxxed. We have all the things in place, and particularly now as we are responsible for the tracing. So we have those sorts of procedures in place as well.
And as you mentioned, this school is located in southwest Sydney, and it was in these areas that there was much harsher lockdowns,
yes.
And a lot of the deaths that have happened during COVID have been here as well. What kind of impact has that had on the community?
Well, the resilience is the issue we've focused on, and the staff reaching out to those families and their communities. They always knew that they had a place that they could come to and would have that support. While they were isolated, we were able to connect through Zoom and those sorts of technologies.
And, you know, teachers are expected to be double vaccinated. How's that going for the staff in your schools?
Look, across all our schools, I'd say we're in the high 90s. We have now just sort of people dealing with the issues of getting the second vaccination, but you can't teach or can't come into our school premises unless you are double vaxxed.
Great. Well, a very exciting day ahead for students who are going back to school, and especially for teachers and parents who get a break from homeschooling.
And through the pandemic, Mahnaz, it's been pretty quiet during our crosses, but during that one we heard the school announcements starting to come over, so we can expect things like that to interrupt our crosses. We'll welcome them in future. Okay, Mahnaz Angury reporting there from Sydney. And yeah, just repeating that news, that, very sadly, that death toll in New South Wales has now passed 500 with more deaths today. That's the death toll from this current outbreak, which started back in June. Dozens of new vaccination clinics are popping up across Queensland to boost vaccination rates. Reporter Michael Rennie joins us now from Brisbane. Michael, g'day. So the government's targeting tourist hotspots?
That's right, Joe, and I'm actually down on the Gold Coast this morning, and this is one of the locations where these pop-up clinics will be coming up this weekend because we have a long weekend coming up because they've moved People's Day, the Echo public holiday, to this weekend. So the Queensland government coming up with creative ways to try and get as many people vaccinated as possible by that December 17th date when we reopen with COVID-affected states. So what that will see is from all the way from Cairns down the Coolangatta, over 20 surf lifesaving clubs will be offering the vaccine from this weekend. And really, we know how many people use these surf lifesaving clubs. They're utilised every single weekend by people going to get a meal, a cheap beer. Also, people taking their kids along to the surf lifesaving clubs because the nippers, we see them every weekend, running out, hundreds of them. And so a good opportunity for their parents to get vaccinated as well. Theme parks are also very popular here on the Gold Coast, and so that will see the vaccines offered there as well at pop-up clinics at Dreamworld, SeaWorld, Movie World, Australia Zoo up on the Sunshine Coast, and also the Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary down here on the Gold Coast, because they do need to try and get us up to 80% as quickly as possible by that December 17th date. And if we have a look how Queensland is tracking at the moment, we're currently sitting at 74.8% first dose and 60.4% second dose. So getting up there, Joe, but still a little bit of a distance to go.
And what's happened in outback Queensland?
Well, what's happened there, Joe, is that there has been a bit of a COVID scare, perhaps a wake-up call for some of those western towns in Queensland with low vaccination rates, because a group of people from New South Wales travelled illegally into the state and visited a number of those western outback towns like Cunnamulla, like Charleville, like Whitby. And so that has seen a bit of a scare, because they've returned back to New South Wales, so they've been escorted back to New South Wales, and it's back in New South Wales. They have 2 of them have tested positive for COVID-19. So it puts those towns on alert. Police and also family members are still looking for one man who was with that group. His name is Jeremiah Rivers. So police officers and his family members are desperately trying to find him now and see if they can get him back into New South Wales. But overall, we had no new cases in Queensland yesterday, so we really are still in a very enviable position.
Okay, Michael Rennie reporting there from the Gold Coast.